This is Miles Crawford, and welcome to the TRAC Staffing Podcast. There is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding that surrounds the staffing industry as a whole. So, we wanted to dedicate this channel to discuss all things staffing. We'll discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I hope you find the information we discuss here valuable. It's meant for you.
Office of Skills Development and a little background about the agency.
Yeah, so appreciate it, man. I've been looking forward to this. So OSD was created back in 2015 in legislation sponsored by Senator Jane English. And part of the background was that you had multiple grant programs in terms of workforce training and grants for companies and employers, but they were always housed in different agencies. And sometimes, I guess confusing. This was before my time, and so they felt the need to centralize that function in one office, along with the Office of Apprenticeship, and then some connections to career and technical education around the state. And so in 2015, Senator English sponsored a bill creating the Office of Skills Development. It was Act 92 of 2015, and really our mission is to strategically invest in all levels of the Arkansas workforce, from K-12 post-secondary to incumbent working, ensuring that all skill levels are rise so that earning potential increases, and so we do that through, kind of our three main pillars, right, which is our workforce training and development grant program, where we grant, dollars to companies, organizations, associations for incumbent worker training, kind of pre-employment training, and everything in between, the State Office of Apprenticeship. And then obviously our connection with career and technical education is we oversee the 30 secondary career centers that are around the state, most of which are located on the back of a post-secondary institution. So that's kind of who we are and how we came about in a very short time. We've only been around for almost 5 years now. So in state government, we're young and we're growing, but I always say we're small but mighty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you all are pretty diverse with the offerings under that umbrella. So you had mentioned Office of Apprenticeship actually falls underneath OSD?
Yeah, so the State Office of Apprenticeship falls within OSD as kind of a separate division, and so in Arkansas, it's interesting when you look at apprenticeship across the state. Some states rely 100% on federal funds, federal discretionary dollars from the Department of Labor to support apprenticeship in the state. In Arkansas, since the late 80s, we've had dedicated apprenticeship funding. We've had an Arkansas Apprenticeship Coordinating Steering Committee that helps oversee and make decisions for apprenticeship and what that fund gets spent on, as kind of an oversight and additional layer with Office of Skills Development. But we've also had rules and laws and everything else that go along with it. So, we have about $2.4 million in which we invest every single year in apprenticeship here in the state of Arkansas. We have $1.6 million that goes kind of towards our apprenticeship schools to help reimburse them for costs and expenses. But then we also have a set aside special revenue to the tune of about $800,000 a year, specific to the construction trades. So there's a fund, right? And sometimes I'll butcher their name because it's unique, right? But it's the Construction Craft Industry Trust Fund. And so for every $1,000 on non-residential permits that's pulled, 50 cents goes into, or a quarter goes into this fund. I forget what the percentage is, right? But and it goes in to build this up, but that fund can only be spent on construction related occupations. And so those go out in the form of grants for equipment, curriculum, code books, things of that nature.
Are most of those construction apprenticeships union or are these private?
No, there's a mix. I mean, you have some union and some that aren't, right? I mean, you have some private, apprenticeship schools that do their own thing, but you also have a mix of union. And as a matter of fact, I'd probably say that more are non-union than are union.
Okay. So that's only 800,000 for construction apprenticeship. Not bad, but on that split, we have 1.6 million that's going to more. Are those going to more VOTEC schools? Where's that other 1.6?
No. So the 1.6 can be used for those schools that are utilizing in construction trades as well. The 800,000 is just earmarked specific to that, right? But the 1.6 million can go to helping support apprenticeship programs, whether they're in manufacturing, IT, healthcare, or construction, energy, right? High voltage linemen, whatever the case may be. So that 1.6 million kind of goes out to help support all those programs in addition to the construction trades, right? But that 800,000 is specifically used for education and outreach. So like a lot of the times that fund will help go towards, doing different events, sponsoring things at Skills USA, in addition to some of the curriculum and code books and things of that nature that have to be purchased for those licensed occupations such as plumbing and electricians.
Yeah. Skills USA is a really neat program. I had the opportunity to go to, is it in Hot Springs every year, or is that just on the circuit where I happen to catch it?
Nope. Every year it happens right at the Hot Springs Convention Center, and you have kids from all over the state coming down and competing, in all those different career and technical education pathways. It's a really unique experience. And
yeah, I think they had everything from like forensics to maybe like a lock picking. I mean, it was all sorts of crazy. It was a circus and it was really cool. I liked it.
Oh yeah. They have a cosmetology stage. They have to your point, right? They have like a CSI kind of like forensics area. They have paint booths going on. They have welding going on.
Yeah.
They've got CNC little stand-up, machines that they're working on. I mean, it's all encompassing and covers almost all of those pathways that you could think of within CTE.
Yeah, I remember I went with my uncle, Mike Crawford, welding professor here at UA Fort Smith, but we organized a smaller one here in Fort Smith at University of Arkansas, Fort Smith, for welding, called like the Welding Rodeo. And he wanted me to go down there to check out Skills USA with him to sort of model it from that. But I was blown away. I was excited to see something of that scale that was focused on the skills, the trades, because you don't hear a lot about it. But when I got down there and I was, present watching all these kids do all these amazing things with all these different skill sets and trades that were being represented, from HVAC to everything was there. It seemed like we have pretty good representation of that in Arkansas. And I know you wanted to discuss some registered apprenticeship expansion was on the itinerary today. So we'll segue into that. But how many apprenticeships are we seeing that are representative of the trades versus other sectors in Arkansas? I mean, what's that makeup look like?
Yeah, so right now you've probably got about 100 and close to 150 programs that are registered DOL apprenticeship programs in the state. Now, just to give you some perspective, right, that's up from about 80 or so in 2015. So there's been, you've almost doubled the number of apprenticeship programs in the state in a 5-year period.
What would you attribute that to?
A couple of things, right? I think, employers, the ever increasing skills gap, right? Employers trying to figure out how do I recruit, how do I train, and how do I retain, people or workers, right? In a world where turnover is typically high, right? We don't have, the skill sets coming out that we need to. We have the silver tsunami, right? People always talk about that. So I think employers are ever increasingly looking at alternative ways to, solve their own internal hiring processes, right? It's very costly. Turnover is a costly issue that a lot of employers figured out. So I think you're starting to see employers really look at apprenticeship as a structured way of doing that, right? In partnership with a local community college or a third-party training provider, or perhaps internally to their own selves, right? So the other thing I would say is, and credit to the federal government, but, they've made significant investments in registered apprenticeship expansion over the last 5-6 years. There's been a lot of money put out to states. Here in Arkansas, I know we've received well over $5 or $6 million, probably over the last 4 or 5 years, to do just that, which is expand registered apprenticeship outside of the construction trades.
Yeah.
What you see in Arkansas is the same everywhere else around the country, right? You have heavy, if we have 150 apprenticeship programs that are registered in the state, 115, 110 of those are probably the construction trades, maybe, give or take a few.
Yeah.
But if you look at where we've been since, the last 3 years, you had 0 programs that were registered in the IT space. You had maybe 1 or 2 that were registered in the manufacturing space. You had 0 that were healthcare apprenticeships. Now we've probably got 17, 18 different IT apprenticeship programs in the state. You have at least that many manufacturing programs across the state. And we're starting to see healthcare apprenticeships pick up, right? So there's been a CNA program here and there, but we actually are in the process of launching our first registered apprenticeship graduate nursing program in partnership with a couple of hospitals, Saline Memorial and National Park Medical Center in Hot Springs.
Yeah.
Because we actually were on a call yesterday where the hospitals were saying my turnover is 60%, having issues with this. And a lot of times it's because once these individuals graduate and they come work, they're just not ready for that experience. And so having some sort of structured mentorship, right, guide them through that first 6 months to a year while they're on the job is crucial to retaining those individuals. And, there's a lot of data that goes to support, the return on investment to an apprenticeship program. It's like for every dollar, invested from an employer, $1.40, $1.50 is returned on that investment. So I think those two things, are certainly making an impact. And I think just here at the state, we're more diligent and more intentional about talking to companies about apprenticeship because it does provide a pathway that we're seeing happen kind of organically, because as we stand up a manufacturing program, we'll use Fort Smith, for example, right? So you've got a multi-craft apprenticeship program, somewhat like an industrial maintenance apprenticeship program, because a number of employers from the region went to UA Fort Smith and said, hey, we all have a similar need, and how can we go ahead and address this? These people are they're incumbent workers, an incumbent worker program is great, but we'd love to have something more structured. So UA Fort Smith and Ken Warden and Kendall Ross and Cameron McKinney and those guys put together an apprenticeship program. They registered with DOL. And so now you've got employers like Ream, Pradco, Beckert, Simmons, and a couple of others who are now employing apprentices through that program that's being provided by UA Fort Smith as the sponsor and the RTI provider. But to take that a step further, now we're starting to take those same competencies and put them into the secondary career center that exists on the UA Fort Smith campus known as WATC, Western Arkansas Technical Center. And so now when those students, those K-12 students, their junior and senior year, if they have the opportunity to pathway that into that post-secondary attainment, then you're starting to see that pre-apprentice to apprenticeship route, which is going to only help increase those registered apprenticeship opportunities because employers will start to see that students coming out of these programs are better suited for employment than if they hadn't.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like apprenticeships, I know historically were associated really with the union world, definitely heavily associated with construction trades. It sounds like Arkansas has been diversifying a little bit in the last, I think, 5 years of the time frame you referenced, getting it into IT. I was surprised to hear that we got it into healthcare. I know healthcare had a lot of resistance to implementing apprenticeship programs because of the sensitive nature of the work that's being performed. And they don't want to just put people who aren't adequately prepared into those roles. And I spoke with some folks out of state. I think Wisconsin was a place, and Michigan was a place. Michigan Works, they have a program up there, and they had piloted a healthcare apprenticeship program, starting with you'd get them out of high school with concurrent credits, and they could go get like a CNA knocked out by the time they graduated high school. And then you get them on that career pathway with maybe a long-term care facility, maybe hospice care, maybe elderly care. And then they would move them from there up the ladder to LPN. And once again, you know how the ladders work is you can get off wherever you feel comfortable. If you don't want to go further, you don't have to. But it structured it all the way to RN. And they had mentioned that was a really good way, especially to get younger women into that program. Maybe to where, like at Fort Smith, we're very heavy on the manufacturing side, service sector, things like that, and hospitality. And I can see a program like that, especially here in the River Valley area, being really beneficial as far as social mobility, because we do have a lot of vacancies in healthcare. That's a growing sector, obviously. I mean, across the nation, not just unique here to Fort Smith. We're trying to be intentional in terms of which we target. If you can see above my desk here, I have different maps, and I'll be happy to share them with you. That kind of just show the footprint of where our K-12 career centers are and how we're starting to map out where our manufacturing apprenticeships need to align with, where our IT apprenticeships align with.
Now we're starting to talk healthcare, right, and how that's in the mix.
Yeah.
Example of that pathway from CNA through RN, and now we can even develop that through a graduate registered apprenticeship nurse, right? That graduate registered nurse apprenticeship is certainly somewhere we're trying to get to. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
We have work to do. But, you mentioned Wisconsin, and I don't know who you talked to from Wisconsin, but I had the privilege of meeting, I believe the gentleman's name was Josh Johnson. And I don't know who you talked with, but he's with the Office of Apprenticeship there and state director. And one of the things that always stood out to me, and I'm giving credit to them completely for this, was because his predecessor, they came up with this title, right, in terms of apprenticeships, and it was kind of a phrase and kind of almost like a poem, right? But it said, there are wood ships and good ships and ships that sail the sea, but the best ships are apprenticeships, and may they always be. And that little phrase just kind of always stuck with me when I heard it. I haven't recited it since I heard him say it that day, but it's always just been embedded in my mind, because what a catchy way to really talk about how apprenticeships have really stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Some new, even though we're making all these investments now, I mean, apprenticeships have been around for hundreds of years. I think people are really just starting to take a look at it as an alternative strategy, because they're having difficulty finding that top talent. So they figure, well, I'm going to have to grow it myself, but I need some sort of structured program in which to do so. And I think apprenticeship is a perfect example, and it's almost like a perfect storm, right? You have a large population of individuals who are reskilling, who are trying to figure out how to get involved into a different career, perhaps if they were, impacted by COVID-19 or just otherwise unemployed. What better way to go from, unemployed to earning a family sustaining wage than that earn to learn model?
What industries have you seen really that you're excited about that have been embracing apprenticeships effectively, not just sort of playing in that market, but that have been doing it well, using it, for succession planning, internal advancement, sort of, grooming your own internally, which I think is draconian that companies haven't been practicing that in the first place. You've got to take care of the incumbent workforce. But what industries in Arkansas have really been doing this model justice?
I think you got to look at kind of the energy sector a little bit, right? And that high voltage lineman program. You have companies like Entergy Arkansas, who have been doing apprenticeships for some time now, and they do so not because it's a licensed requirement, but because they found out that it's a strategy that they can utilize to, like exactly what you said, which is train that initial individual, get them to a point to where they're productive. And then as they move along that pathway into other areas of employment within that organization, and not just specifically Entergy, but anybody, right? And then backfilling those positions through a structured, work-based learning model like apprenticeship. So number one, kind of energy that sector has been doing it for a number of years. Obviously, the construction trades are doing it for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a licensed occupation, and what better way to go about that than through a 4-year apprenticeship like you do with plumbing and electricians. But, in terms of a sector in Arkansas who's been doing it for a long time, there haven't really been a lot doing it for what I would say a long time.
Yeah.
I think you've really starting to see this catch hold and really catch fire in IT, for example. I mean, we are launching IT apprenticeships by cohort, right? I mean, we've launched 3 or 4 just this week. And a couple of years ago, we didn't have any. So we're doing apprenticeship in the IT space for web developers, robot process automation, cybersecurity, IT generalist, right? And we're not talking about apprenticeships where, you're working during the day and then you go sit in a classroom a couple hours, 2 or 3 nights a week. It's all virtual remote apprenticeships. We're front loading a lot of the RTI pieces on the front end. So prior to that individual ever setting foot sometimes in that employer's place, a business, right? They already have all the related technical instruction completed. And then they come on board and they're able to go immediately to work and go through the OJT requirements of that 1-year apprenticeship of 2,000 hours, right? So
these IT apprenticeships, are they a lot of self-driven as far as the learning side of it?
No, I mean, we have a structured environment in which it goes. I mean, we have a number of different RTI providers in which we work with, from UA Global Campus, an organization called Expansion, to the Arkansas Code Academy, the American Cyber Alliance for cyber apprenticeships. It's structured in terms of, you have times and dates that things are taking place and when meetings and that Zoom-like experience is occurring, right? Or that asynchronous learning may be happening as well. So, I mean, it is somewhat self-driven, but, you know, you're still being employed by somebody at the end of the day, and they're paying you a paycheck to go through that training. So it's wise to show up when training is happening.
Yeah, it becomes a requirement. Well, I like to see that, especially in IT in Arkansas, you know, just outside looking in and maybe even inside the state. You just don't, not a lot of people are aware of the amount of IT jobs. I think I heard that IT is like the third or fourth largest occupation in the Fort Smith Metro, because every company has a few IT people on staff. And then not to mention a lot of companies that, you know, we may say are trucking, you know, logistics. A lot of that is IT based these days. And I mean, IT is blending into every industry. So I've heard a quote. It's something along the lines of, the sentiment is this, that you may not be in IT, but IT is going to be in your industry. So it's like the game is adaptation, and everybody's going to have to find a way to integrate IT into their business, or, you know, largely be left behind. But one of the interesting things, and you touched on it about apprenticeships, is these are age old, you know, thousands of years old training models. And we can take the principles and adapt them to successfully train in something like IT, which is the newest, most innovative thing. Now, in the energy sector, I kind of want to circle back around to this real quick. What are we seeing with like green energy or renewable energy? Do we have much for occupational growth that you're seeing in either of those?
I mean, I think you're going to see some occupational growth. I think it's just going to be slow. I mean, right now, but obviously, I mean, I think there's certainly some optics in terms of, you know, you're starting to see solar take hold in some areas of the state, right? Some of these energy companies are starting to look at how do they expand that, right? But at the end of the day, they're going to have individuals who can go out, implement, install, service, whether that's a solar farm or whether that's panels on a house. So, you know, right now, I mean, I'm not seeing as much from my side just in general, but and not just speaking in apprenticeships, right? I mean, obviously, we're not there in terms of any discussions around apprenticeships or that type of thing, but you know, that's not trickling down to my office, at least at this point. I suspect that in the next 24 months, probably start to see some of that happening, but right now it's few between where I see some of that coming to me.
Do you see any surprising occupational trends across the state? Any occupations that are really growing or worth investing in or looking at?
I think some of the, you know, this idea of robot process automation, you know, to me, not too long ago, that was kind of a foreign concept, but apparently it's been around for a while, and I just haven't paid attention to it. But, you know, I'm starting to see, you know, companies look at ways to, you know, reduce expenses and outsource some of that, you know, that work that they do from hired staff and outsource it to an organization who does that for that company, you know, from a different area of the state, country, world sometimes, right? As a way to cut costs and without sacrificing the integrity of what they're doing. So, you know, to me, that's just a unique, you know, trend that I've been seeing a lot of. You know, companies are doing it internally. Some are choosing to export that, right, to another company, another organization. So that's one thing that I would mention. I think it also, you know, you have to look at cybersecurity as a huge trend. You know, I mean, there's a lot of conversation going on around cyber right now, and how do we prepare, and how do companies, you know, constantly have to innovate against, you know, the attacks that are occurring.
Yeah.
And the technology is ever evolving. So the staff of individuals who are fighting against that on a day-to-day basis have to continuously be learning to make sure that they're keeping up with the pace of those who are trying to do harm to private sector databases or to public sector government institutions like ourselves. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that ties in nicely to the ReSkill Arkansas campaign. If we want to get into that a little bit, I looked up the website before you hopped on to join me today, but tell us a little bit about that initiative.
Yeah, so that's something we're actually really proud of. Recently launched, ReSkill Arkansas is an initiative. You know, we took part of a National Governors Association network of states that over the last several months, we've been working on how do we reskill individuals during this economic recovery for jobs that either they no longer exist because of COVID-19 or how things have changed and there's a need to change and transition into something different. So, in Arkansas, it was a kind of a child of partnership in terms of the Office of Skills Development, the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences, who serves as our industry intermediary for IT on the apprenticeship world, and the Division of Workforce Services. When we looked at, what's our population of individuals who are currently on unemployment filing for UI and PUA, that's a population of individuals we need to help the most. And so we started to try to get some data and some information around, okay, well, how many claims are being filed every month, every week? And so we started to think to ourselves, we have this demand from private sector employers for IT talent. And you touched on it a minute ago when you were talking about, the need for IT in the River Valley region. And it's not just IT companies, right? But manufacturing companies have IT, transportation logistics companies have IT, health providers, financial services institutions all have IT needs. And so, we thought, okay, how can we do something that can go to scale, that can be replicated and can be done virtually and remotely from anywhere in the state of Arkansas. And so ReSkill Arkansas, basically is this initiative to take unemployed individuals filing for UI or PUA or otherwise unemployed, putting them in a pre-apprenticeship training program that aligns with our registered Department of Labor apprenticeships through the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences, putting them on a pathway from pre-apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship at no cost to the individual. So for example, we've targeted Northeast Arkansas, Central Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas, and Western Arkansas to date. We've sent out over 20-something thousand emails to individuals who we had on file. And so of those, within this body of the email is kind of a flyer, so to speak, that kind of talks to, what's going on within IT, what are the main occupations, what are kind of the salary ranges, how do you get started if you are interested in this ReSkill Arkansas initiative. There's a link to learn more that takes you to the landing page that you received. And so upon going to that landing page, as you saw, right, there's an area for someone to register. Upon registering for the program, they get signed up in our greenhouse, and then an assessment gets sent to them. This assessment is about a 20-question long assessment, takes about 45 minutes to complete, that really kind of gauges where somebody is at this point in time and whether or not they'd be a good fit for an IT career. And so we're scoring basically people into three groups, kind of a low, moderate, and high level. For those individuals that score on the low end, right, we're in the process of putting together some resource materials so that they can kind of follow up with if they choose to continue down that path. But we're also taking this outside of IT and moving it into construction and manufacturing as well. So we're going to continue to work with those individuals that may not score at the level we need them to in order to kind of proceed to that next stage.
So if they score lower, they're kind of getting in a funnel to get referred to other programs that might be able to assist them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Exactly. And so we're tracking that. We're keeping that information as best as we can. But yeah, exactly. We're not leaving anyone out in the cold, right? We want to take that population of individuals and provide them with additional training opportunities, or perhaps push them towards their local workforce board for case management and services and wraparound services so they can find other areas of training, whether it's at a local community colleges or something else.
Yeah.
But for that population that kind of scores in that middle range, right, then that's kind of that 50 to 75 percentile. And so if you score in that range, we feel like you're probably a pretty good candidate for some of our pre-apprenticeship training. And so upon that completion, once we get that assessment, our talent acquisition team at the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences will reach back out to that person, schedule an interview, and kind of go through and have that one-on-one conversation around what's your background, what's your history, what's your knowledge of this and that. And then upon completion of that, and being recommended to enter into the pre-apprenticeship, we'll move that person into pre-apprenticeship training, which is currently going through UA Global Campus through that partnership. And so once we get them to that point, we register them with UA Global Campus. And then they start with kind of a framework where they go first. It's a 24 hours worth of seat time for an IT generalist kind of fundamentals of IT course. It's 24 hours of seat time. And once they complete that, then they have different tracks that they can go through. So whether that's PC security, web development, network, plus, or whatever the case may be, there's kind of 4 different tiers or 4 different kind of avenues in which they can go from that point with. And then upon completion of that pre-apprenticeship, each one of those is 24 hours as well. So you're talking about 48 hours of seat time to kind of go through that pre-apprenticeship piece. Once you complete that, then our talent acquisition team is actually going to work with our network of employers. We have over 20 something active employers right now who are employing IT apprentices. We've got another like 35 or 40 who are in the pipeline who are interested. And we've got another 6 or 7 who are kind of on that I want to learn more stage.
Yeah.
But once we get to that point, we'll match that individual with an employer. Say, if you want to go through that IT fundamentals and web development area, we have a list of employers with job recs that are available right now who are looking for that skill set. We'll match that person with them, move that person over to that company hiring manager and have them an interview. And upon hiring from that company, we will then move them into the registered apprenticeship program that are always ongoing through this cohort type model. So as of today, we only launched this a couple of weeks ago. We've already had over 130 people apply. We've already had another 80 something assessments that have been completed. And we've got about 30 people, I think, at this point who are already going through the pre-apprenticeship training. So in just a short amount of time, you're seeing the fact that there are people in the state who are looking for opportunities, and we just need to connect them to that and provide them that opportunity and remove those barriers, whether it's cost or transportation, right? By making this virtual through UA Global, where an individual takes that training, UA Global sees that completed, and then they kick the next training off. You're removing a lot of barriers by doing it that way.
So UA Global, I'm assuming this is going to be online based on the 24 hours and then the follow-up. What sort of a commitment are you looking for? Does an employer need to be ready to make if they want to participate in an apprenticeship? We can just reference the IT one for now.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be, apprenticeship at the end of the day is employer led. Right. And so if the employer doesn't see it as a strategy that works for them, then that's okay. Right. There's a lot of different ways in which employers can source talent, train, or retain their internal workers. Right. But for those that are interested in figuring out how do I find candidates in an ever competing world, because if my top talents go into the coasts, right, and if I'm competing with Northwest Arkansas and the hub up there for IT talent, then how do I source talent elsewhere in the state of Arkansas? And so we think that apprenticeship is a great way to do that. And from an employer's perspective, if you review the curriculum, if you look at how it's structured, if you agree to kind of, apprenticeship in itself requires that you have to provide a pay raise within the first year of the apprenticeship. So if you're willing to do some of those things and you're committed to showing that it's not a commitment that we need you to make that says I'm going to hire 15 or 20. You may just need one. Right? You may just need 2 or 3 people. That's fine. But the commitment is that you're going to look at those standards of apprenticeship. You're going to comply with that. We're going to take care of all the paperwork and the reporting for you so that burden's not on the employer. Because one of the major things that we always find with employers is they're like, I don't need any more reporting or requirements on me.
They don't want to invite
if someone was going to do this for me, that'd be much more attractive.
Yeah.
Do what?
They don't want to invite the Department of Labor in, is what I hear a lot. No. So we take care of that for them by not making them the sponsor, but by allowing kind of the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences industry intermediary model to take on that burden for our employers. Yeah. So whether you're an IT or a community college could do this as well, or a Fort University such as UA Fort Smith, right? So really the commitment from the employer is employ the apprentice, pay them a wage, and we, the state, are going to take care of everything else, because right now there's a lot of funding incentives to go along with registered apprenticeship expansion. And for the last probably at least 12 months, maybe even longer, anyone who's been looking to expand into apprenticeship, whether it's IT, manufacturing, healthcare, we're kind of providing that at no expense to the organization. So we know that there's a per apprentice cost. And so we have some federal funds through the Department of Labor that we're leveraging, along with our state funding dollars that we have here in the Office of Skills Development. And so the investment from the employer is that they're paying that apprentice, and then we're taking care of the training costs for them. Now, apprenticeships, you had mentioned they only work if they're employer led. What level you have to work with employers to create the curriculum of the program? They're the ones that you're in conversation with. You decide what they think is valuable, what they need to learn, what the course content needs to be, how long it needs to be, how long they need to focus on each thing within the microcosm, within the macrocosm. So you're depending on employers in the industry to be participating from phase one.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of financial commitment that they have to make to help sort of fund these operations, or is that part of what you all are able to offer employers?
Yeah, I mean, that's all done with no expense out of their pocket other than time, right? And we can make the argument that time is money.
Yeah.
You know, it requires a time commitment from the employers, because you're exactly right. If we go out and we develop something and then try to take it to the employers and sell it, you know, we're never going to get there.
Right.
We have to have them, you know, talking with us from day one.
Yeah.
You know, we're blessed with you know, tech giants like a Charles Morgan, right? Fort Smith guy, who was with Axiom and now is with First Orion and working through with us and kind of getting these things stood up and partnering with us in the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences, you know, with the Forge Institute and the American Cyber Alliance in terms of what cyber training needs there are.
Yeah.
Talking to employers, talking to the National Guard, talking to banks, you know, so we have working groups, you know, and you have advisory councils that help with all that. But it starts with one. And then, you know, when, you know, you kind of hear that kind of that tribe mentality where someone sees what someone else is doing and they want to get a part of that too.
Yeah.
But we try to customize every program as much as we can. We try to do it by two different ways, right? We have a cohort model, kind of a community model where, hey, you know, we've worked with a group of employers to develop this. And if you all find that this is a kind of a consensus among you all that, yes, these are the skill sets that we need, then we can put apprentices from a number of companies, you know, especially in IT space. It can be, I mean, if you're doing web development or IT generalists, right, then you could have manufacturing employers, you can have IT employers, you can have whatever the case may be, you know, from a community. But if it's somebody, maybe it's an Arvest Bank, or maybe it's, you know, I don't know who it could be, just insert a company, a JB Hunt, and they want something that's more structured to what they're doing, then we can certainly stand something up that's very customized just for their specific purposes. Very flexible and customizable.
Now, is there sort of a critical mass, say either a cohort, a group of, you know, similar industry, similar occupations, companies that employ similar occupations and skill sets getting together? I mean, what is sort of that critical mass to make an apprenticeship discussion a realistic and feasible option? I'm assuming, you know, a small business with 1 to 2 CNC operators, unfortunately, isn't going to be able to pioneer a full apprenticeship program to fit their needs. Maybe a larger cohort could come together. Yeah. So what's that sort of scale we look at to make that feasible?
It's a good question, right? So if you're going to do something internally, right, if you only need 2 or 3, then that may work for you. But if you're going to try to outsource that training to perhaps a community college is going to have some fixed expenses, right? They're going to have instructional costs. They're going to have facilities expenses, right? Because those people are going to be there if you're customizing this at night, you know, and then as you only have 2 or 3, right, the economies of scale, you know, if it's going to cost the instructional provider $20,000 to do it, and you've only got $2,000, you've only got 2 people in it, right? That per apprentice cost is now $10,000. But if you have 10 people in it, right, that per apprentice cost is $2,000. So
yeah,
if you're going to do a community model, yes, I mean, you have to have some sort of critical mass and scale so that it's profitable for the individual who is going to be providing the instruction. If you're going to do it internal, you can do an apprenticeship with 1, 2, 10, 25, 30. We just launched one recently with ConAgra Foods in Russellville, who's doing 32 apprentices, but they're doing it all internally. They're not outsourcing the training stuff. They built a training room on site there at their facility. Their own internal people are providing the training.
Yeah.
They've identified 32 journeymen, because you have to have that 1-to-1 ratio of journeymen to apprentices. And so they're about to launch that right now. Whether they had 2 or 32, they were going to be able to do it because it was internal to them, and they already have some expenses covered in terms of training. But if you're a small employer and you're looking at somebody else to outsource that training for you, you're certainly going to need to find some other partners to go into that with, so it's cost effective for you.
You mentioned the 1-to-1 journeyman to apprenticeship. Is that standard across all apprenticeships, or is that unique to the model they're doing or the requirements?
Yeah, that's a Department of Labor requirement. You know, and the state tried to, you know, kind of lead that requirement not too long ago, maybe 4 years ago, 2 sessions ago, something like that, by making it a 3-to-1 ratio. But
Yeah.
the federal Department of Labor talks about a 1-to-1 ratio. So that's really, if you're an employer and you're going to have an apprentice, you got to have a journeyman. You got to have that mentorship.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely hate the idea of diluting any experience, and I'm a big believer in the value of mentorship. It just seems that a 1-to-1 could be difficult to, it would definitely limit the capacity of people you could put through an apprenticeship at any given time.
Well, think about tech too. I mean, you used to have 1-to-1 apprenticeships because someone was on site with somebody. But if I'm on FaceTime with you and you're on a job site and I'm walking you through what to do with something, then does that, there's this language that talks about direct supervision.
Yeah.
What does direct mean? Does that mean I have to physically be there with you? Or, I'm looking at you right now, Miles. So does that mean does this consider direct, supervision or contact? So, there are things I think that have to be revisited in terms of how we look at it.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily from the state side, but from the federal side.
Interesting. Do we see any changes, any larger investments, any change of direction coming from the federal side? I mean, apprenticeship is regulated on the federal level, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'll see it. I think you're going to continue to see investment into apprenticeship. I don't know exactly with the climate that's going on right now, how that's going to look, but
yeah.
I have a feeling, apprenticeship and workforce development is a bipartisan issue. You're not going to find too many people who are arguing against workforce or economic development. So, I have a feeling that, the investments that have been made over the last 4, 5, 6 years have worked really well. And I think the Department of Labor at the federal side is going to continue to make significant investments. I mean, we've already seen 2 solicitations come out recently. We had one in May that we applied for and were awarded a $450,000 grant to do some planning for. That's going to allow us to create a new website and a new database to do some unique things with, to operate our programs more efficiently, and a marketing tool, right? So that people actually can go to a website and a landing page and find out whether you're an employer, whether you're an apprentice, whether you're someone who's unemployed, and find, what employers are engaged in apprenticeship. What does it take to be an apprentice? What does it take to be a sponsor? How do I get connected? The training providers that do some of those things. So, but then we just applied for another one on what's today, Friday, on Wednesday of this week. It's called one workforce H-1B grant, and apprenticeship was a part of that. It wasn't the whole thing, but I think you'll continue to see significant investment from the federal side. And we're looking at what we can do with our state dollars. And it's probably not the right time to be asking for additional funding for some of these things. We see how things shake out. But as we continue to expand apprenticeship, we don't want to be reliant on federal funding and grants to support the efforts that are being made here. We want to be able to do that with some of the funding we already have. So whether that's this session or 2 years from now, I think we probably will see the need to make some different investments into apprenticeship, or change how we're funding it today. And we'll have to have that conversation at that time.
Yeah. Now you mentioned an H-1B grant. What's that look like?
Yeah, the Department of Labor put out a funding solicitation to target those occupations, typically, that align with H-1B visa type stuff for manufacturing and information technology. And so transportation as well were the three kind of sectors they wanted to target with, but you had to kind of align it with, taking somebody from an unemployed or a low skill, below the poverty level, and putting them into a pathway. And so we put together what we feel is like a pretty unique application that's going to allow us to do some things. Now, whether or not we get it, we'll see. We'll probably know by, January, February, but
okay. So this wasn't targeted towards H-1Bs. It was about the occupations generally held by those with H-1B visas.
Correct. Gotcha.
Well, that's neat. I'm always about, internal American talent and moving them up to those occupations when we can. H-1B was meant to be, a supplement to vacancies that, we couldn't fill internally and didn't have access to the amount of skilled labor. So that's great to hear on that. What about, excuse me, outside of registered apprenticeships, what sort of trainings that maybe aren't so formalized are you all a proponent of or assist with on any level?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with Future Fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Future Fit's obviously kind of a pre-employment entry-level production technician worker training, non-credit workforce training that's going on. And by non-credit, obviously not for college credit, but, taking those individuals again, targeting that, below the poverty level or unemployed, underemployed individual, putting them through that program to get them employed as a production technician, entry-level work.
And to clarify, you said non-credit, but they do push them towards industry recognized credentials.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, right now you've got those programs existing at Black River Technical College in Pocahontas, Ozarka College in Melbourne, Arkansas. You've got Pulaski Tech here in Little Rock, SAU Tech down in Camden, UA Fort Smith, obviously in Fort Smith, and then University of Arkansas Costa down in DeQueen area, who are operating those programs now. And we've seen some good results out of that. We're going to continue to see how that flourishes. There's only been one phase of that curriculum developed. There's supposed to be a level 2 and a level 3 coming along with that, which, could align to an apprenticeship. I'm not going to go down that path yet, but we're working on it. So you've got that, right? And then, we're actually working with the Association of Builders and Contractors. They have every state has one of those chapters. A gentleman by the name of Bill Rochelle, and here in Maumelle in North Little Rock, he's got a facility out there. It's a great training facility. And they have kind of a quick start, fast track type program for core construction workers. And so, basically what they'll do is they'll put them on a 2-week, training program and pathway, where they'll take them from, what are tools to how can I be profitable or perhaps get moved into a position as a laborer for a construction company or contractor, or perhaps into an HVAC, plumbing, electrical apprenticeship program with one of their many association, employer, members. So we're going to start that probably right at the first of the year. We haven't done that yet. They've had some really good successes with that program in Baltimore, Maryland. There's a story about a gentleman who, he was homeless, and he got involved in this training. They had some sort of fund set up in Baltimore that allowed, or Maryland, I can't remember if it was a state fund or city fund, but that allowed individuals such as himself to get enrolled in this stuff at no cost. And they also paid them a stipend for the 2 weeks, right? So they gave them like a $250 stipend for the first and second week upon enrolling. And this gentleman bought bus tickets and peanut butter and jelly and bread and lived off peanut butter and jelly sandwich and bus tickets for those 2 weeks. And then he got a job. And just the other day that he was giving a speech at, I guess at a chapter kind of association thing nationally. And he's bought a house, he's gotten married, and now he's making like, $80,000, $90,000 a year. And all he needed was an opportunity. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is try to figure out ways to give opportunities to people so that we can take the ones that are in most need and put them on some sort of pathway. Because I think one of the biggest issues that we see a lot is people just don't know what they don't know. Lack of access to information, lack of understanding the opportunities that exist. And then when those things are presented to them, realizing that there's opportunities on the backside of that if you'll stick with it. If we make it 3, 4, 5, 6 months to take these people from unemployed to making a wage, that we're not going to do it. We have to make it short term, fast paced, 2 weeks, 4 weeks at a most. We're looking kind of, do we pay stipends in some of these non-credit workforce programs or some of the things we're doing? You can look at that from 2 different sides. So we're trying to figure out if that makes sense for us to do or not. But, those are 2 programs that we see. But on a yearly annual basis, our office receives probably over 250 to 300 grants for workforce development funding, whether that's from companies or organization associations. So we're constantly investing money into those companies or organizations who are trying to upskill or reskill their internal workers, new hires, or if there's an association or a group of individuals who are getting together trying to work out a project to put people on a pathway. We fund a lot of that stuff too. And sometimes we, over the last few years, we invested about $2.7 million 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2.8 the year after that. And then this last year was just a little over 3 million. So we're seeing some slowdown in terms of the grants and the requests that have come in. this year, and obviously that's a little bit due to COVID and some of the things that have happened because people retracted. They weren't investing as much in the workforce, but we're starting to see that pick up. So anyway.
Yeah, to tie that into, ReSkill Arkansas, the campaign you're doing there, driving people to there, doing sort of the 20-question assessment, figuring out what their competency level is initially, what apprenticeship routes they may be most qualified for. This seems like a reaction to COVID. Does it have any longer term strategy associated with it, or is it just kind of a short term kind of stop the bleeding assistance strategy?
No, when we originally launched it, right, it was a direct result of COVID-19. But we actually now we see this sticking around for quite a while because there's always going to be a need regardless, right? And unfortunately, there's always going to be people who are unemployed or underemployed. And so while right now we're looking at that unemployed population who are filing, claims for unemployment insurance benefits and trying to move them off that, because the money that's being spent, while very necessary, we'd certainly like to put them back into the private sector, and earning that wage as opposed to the government subsidizing that. But we see this expanding outside of IT. So that fast track program for construction, we're going to start targeting that with a ReSkill Arkansas population out of the central Arkansas region, simply because that's where the training location is for now. When it comes to manufacturing, part of our ReSkill Arkansas initiative is going to be tied to manufacturing. And so those areas that I mentioned earlier, where you have those future fit schools, we're going to target those population centers and those areas where we know that those individuals exist with a ReSkill Arkansas for manufacturing, right? And so it'll be all the data that you would have for IT, but for the manufacturing industry, that same process can be replicated. We're working with Amatral right now. Tooling U is another organization we've been working with, and a couple others to figure out what kind of assessment could we provide these people, electronically upon registering, give them an assessment. If they score above a specific threshold, let's move them through the pipeline, and then let's get them connected to the community college or four-year university in their region that's going to host the future fit training. Now we've got some work to do there, because now you're going to have some transportation, expenses. You're going to have some in-person training. So we're actually talking right now about how could we deliver that in a virtual asynchronous environment, but scheduling lab time for the hands-on pieces so that you go through and you learn the material and then you come show it, right? You show what you've learned. So we see this going on not just for the short term. This is going to be a long-term strategy for us. We're going to basically essentially add it to our portfolio as a program that we're going to be offering. And we expect that this is going to be something that we're able to talk very proudly about, not just in terms of how we've reskilled individuals during this time, but how we've moved people off unemployment year after year after year and into good jobs.
Yeah, I love the idea of it, and that's why I wanted to ask. It seemed like it was a direct response to COVID, but it had implications that could go above and beyond and last longer than the pandemic hopefully would linger around. So it sounds like it's going to eventually open up to be a more broad platform, assessing more than just IT fit, and then kind of lining them up with career fits and different occupational availabilities in that area, connecting them to employers, programs, things like that.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to mention real quick on that is we're actually partnering with another entity that I've worked with in the past, and who a number of districts around the state are actually leveraging. I think Bentonville, Fort Smith, I think Van Buren, Bryant, I think are just a couple who are utilizing this, but it's called U Science. I'm not sure if you're familiar with U Science or not.
I've heard of it. I'm not familiar.
So, at the K-12 space, right, they do a lot of interest inventory, right? So, hey, 7th, 8th grade student, let's give you this assessment and find out what you're interested in, and then let's put you on a pathway based off your interests. Well, what U Science does is U Science gives you a holistic kind of assessment. I've actually been going through it myself. I mean, you have to spend some time on it.
Yeah. Are you in the right job?
I don't know yet. I haven't finished. I'm still playing the logic game, so we'll see. But I mean, it's not an easy assessment. It takes time. So if someone goes through it, number one, they're dedicated.
Yeah.
So that's a good outcome in itself. But what it does is it layers interest and aptitude on top of each other. So it'll show you perhaps what, based off not just your interest, but maybe your aptitude. Because, if you're that individual whose mother, sister, brother is a nurse or is a doctor, whatever, you may be interested in healthcare, but your aptitudes may show that you'd be great for engineering or in architecture or, and whatever the case may be, or in IT, for example.
Yeah.
And what we're thinking about doing is partnering with Youth Science and giving this same population of individuals, whether you're unemployed, we're actually thinking about doing this statewide in partnership with the Be Pro, Be Proud initiative with the state chamber, but giving them that Youth Science assessment so we can figure out ahead of time, okay, Miles Crawford's interest and aptitude show that he'd be a great fit for construction trades. Okay, well then let's blast that construction trades assessment link, ReSkill Arkansas profile to him so that he sees that. And then let's try to figure out a way to have a meaningful conversation with that individual about that. Yeah. Or perhaps it's another individual who we find that their aptitudes align with IT. Well, let's send them the IT information. So that way we can make it a little more targeted and try to, instead of just giving a big blast to 15,000 people around IT, what percentage of that 15,000 may really be a good fit based off that interest in inventory or that interest in aptitude inventory, and then target them specifically.
Well, I mean, that's really valuable information to know. So I've put together a training program that's anywhere from 10 to 14 hours of class coursework, and then it's 2 days long and in between the actual courses. So I'm thinking maybe one Friday, then the next Friday. There's anywhere from 10 to 30 hours of self-work you have to do in between those courses, because it's going over all of this stuff, because knowing what your interests are, knowing what your competencies are, knowing the sort of environment you're drawn to and the things that you're naturally kind of inclined towards, those are all things that you have to do a lot of work, like you mentioned, to really discover that about yourself. But those are also very big indicators of longevity in certain positions, success in certain roles. Really, it's a self-awareness component that can be hard to do without the right tools to guide you through it, because it's very difficult. But having that knowledge, I think, is one of the big ways that people not only outperform but outlast. They, a lot of times whenever external stresses may come to us, whether it's on the job or life or whatever, if we're not in a place that we're sort of molded to be in, it's harder to hold on. And I think, a lot of the things we talk about when we talk about work is psychological. So it's very important to have that underpinning and that foundation very well understood. You had mentioned the homeless gentleman that was able to take advantage of the apprenticeship program and then make it 80, 90,000, has a house, has a wife, all this stuff. I mean, that's a sort of disposition that people are capable of accomplishing amazing things whenever sort of that foundation and that groundwork's been laid and they have an understanding, they have a buy-in and a lot of that stuff. So I love to hear about that Youth Science and going through K through 12, because that's something I think that we've sort of overlooked. We've become so mechanical when it comes to skills assessment that we sort of forget the humanity element of it a lot of times. So that's a really cool program to see brought in. And I know we're coming up right on an hour, so I'll wrap it up, but I wanted to get into the Shark Tank opportunity for organization workforce ideas. So hit me with this real quick.
So about, I guess this was probably in late August, early September, we were sitting here thinking, and we have a heat map right around the state, just out of our workforce development grant program, that kind of shows where are the areas of the state that are hot in terms of where the funding's going and where the grant applications are coming from, and where are the areas that are cold, right? And of course, right, you can probably think heavy Northwest West, heavy Little Rock, Central Arkansas, and heavy Northeast Arkansas, right, up into Mississippi County, Craighead, Jonesboro, that area, And so we thought, okay, well, how do we get more applications coming from East Arkansas, South Arkansas, North Central Arkansas, and some of those areas where we don't see the grants coming from. So we put out a funding announcement and did a webinar that kind of just basically said, hey, the Office of Skills Development is going to invest $500,000 into unique workforce development initiatives outside of our normal scope, because a lot of the people who apply for a lot of these things, they kind of know our process of incumbent worker type focus and certain structures that we have in place. But we wanted to broaden it out a little bit and give them the opportunity to really think creatively, about what in my region could I ask for funding for that I normally couldn't ask OSD for. And so after we did all that, my associate director, Stephanie Isaacs, came up with this idea, and she was like, we should just kind of hold this like Shark Tank, give them 5 minutes, 2-3 minutes to come in and pitch their project to us, and then just start asking questions and drilling them and trying to figure out exactly what it is you're doing. How are you going to implement it? What's your long-term plan for sustainability? How many people are you going to serve? How much is it going to cost? And just kind of really get into all the details. And so, we had about, I think it was 8 or 9 different applications that came in. And so we did that on a very small scale. And it was really successful, right? And so we're actually, as of about an hour ago, right before I jumped on with you, we kind of sat down and figured out which projects we were going to fund. And Stephanie's working through getting those letters out to those entities so that we can start to work through kind of what the memorandums of understanding need to look like. But it also made us start thinking. I've talked to Senator Jane English about this, and I've talked to some others about it, and said, Stephanie's idea of this Shark Tank experience where, we bring in, we announce it 6 months out in advance. We continually update and monitor people on it and give them that information, market it as this entire thing, set aside a specific amount of money per shark, right? So each shark, whether you have 4 or 5 or whatever, has $100,000 or $150,000 they can invest in different projects. And you just run through them like we do with Shark Tank. And whether we like something or we don't like something, you can be out, you can invest, you can go in with one another. And so we're hoping to do that, sometime in the summer of this year, of 2021, so we're going to try to put together some sort of marketing plan and scheme around, number one, who wants to be the sharks, how we could go about doing that. And then obviously the key is getting that awareness out to the associations, to the groups, to the colleges, to the employers, to the chambers, so that we have a meaningful, group. Because, I think we probably had, I don't know, like I said, like 9 or 10 different applications this time. We hope to see 25 or 30, right, the next time, and make a day out of it, right, and just bring people in and out the entire time. And hopefully, the goal would be to invest in projects that are employer driven, that are meeting the needs of communities around the state, with the outcomes, taking people from unemployed, underemployed, and putting them into high paying, middle paying career jobs that are family sustaining, and then finding out what that return is. We're the state, so we're going to make them report on it. But I just think it's a unique concept, and it gets people out of kind of just the, mechanical, right? You mentioned, right? We just kind of go through the motions a lot of times, and it is what it is. But I think this would be a really unique way. I don't know of anybody else that's really doing this. So we want to be the first, and, start trying to get it out there and implement it and make a marketing plan around it. And we'll see where it's at. Maybe Miles needs to be a shark. Maybe that's what we need to do.
Listen, I have a couple of ideas already. When I saw that idea in the email, I said, man, I could take up an hour just pitching different ideas I have. But yeah, whenever you all come to my neck of the woods in Western, I'd love to participate and help promote it and support that however I could. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up. This is the last question I wanted to ask you. Where would you like to see, as far as private industry goes, where would you like to see your dollars be invested more right now? What are more things you wish private industry would do that you could invest behind?
Investments in K-12 education, post-secondary education. We've got a lot of needs out there, and unfortunately, there's just not enough funding to go around it. And I think if K-12 and post-secondary would be responsive to what employers are telling them, I think they would see significant investments being made across the state. Because at the end of the day, employers are trying to figure out where they're going to find talent, how they're going to source it, and how are they going to reduce their turnover? How are they going to recruit, train, and retain those individuals? We partner with companies day in and day out to make investments into K-12 and post-secondary programs so that the individuals they're trying to hire are training on the equipment and on the curriculum and understanding that they're going to see within those facilities, whether that's at a Tyson Foods, at a ConAgra, at a Lockheed Martin, at a Hytrawl in Northeast Arkansas. I think employers are there and they're willing to help. I just think we have to make sure that the K-12 and post-secondary are willing to meet them where they're at. And I guess that's how I'll answer that.
Okay. Awesome. All right, man. Well, Cody, I appreciate it. I will keep an eye out for the email on the Shark Tank info, and I will make sure that I put it through all the outlets I have to help promote it, and I'll be there
Perfect.
on the front row if nothing else. So,
Well, thanks, Miles. I appreciate it. It's always good talking with you.
hey, you too, man. All right, have a good weekend, bud.
Thank you for listening. And now it's time to get back to work.